In this video, we will explore the StarCellBio user interface by performing an experiment that uses the Western blotting experimental technique. In particular, we will explore accessing an assignment, starting an experiment, including the steps of an experiment, navigating within StarCellBio, as well as selecting and performing an experimental technique. This video will highlight these features of StarCellBio using the Western blotting experimental technique as an example. Many of these features are the same in the other experimental techniques within StarCellBio. We will highlight the flow cytometry and microscopy experimental techniques in video tutorials 3 and 4 respectively. Now let's take a tour of the StarCellBio user interface. When you first sign in, you will be in the Assignments tab. In the Assignments tab, you will see all of your assignments in the Assignments window on the left side. To view a particular assignment, select the assignment and read through all of the pages of the assignment on the right. In this particular assignment, the user is asked to use StarCellBio to answer all of the questions and then submit their answers on pen and paper to the instructor. When you are ready to start your experiments for this assignment, either click on the Experiments tab in the top menu or click on the green Start Experiments button in the bottom right corner. If you would like to reference your assignment at any time, navigate back to the Assignments tab. Your work in the Experiments tab will be saved. Now let's explore the Experiments user interface. At the top of each Experiments page, you will see the assignment name for which you are performing experiments, and the current experiment's name. This drop-down menu can be used to navigate easily between experiments for a particular assignment. Underneath this, you will see the navigation toolbar, which shows your progress through the steps of an experiment. In addition, it can be used for navigation between the different pages of StarCellBio. The first step of performing an experiment is to design the experiment. When designing an experiment, it is important to think about the question your experiment will address, your hypothesis for the experiment, and the technique or techniques that may be best suited for your experimental analysis. The design page contains prompts for your answers to these questions. When you are ready to proceed, click the Experiment Setup button to set up your experiment. On the Setup page, you will specify all of the samples for your experiment, including the necessary strains and treatments. In some experiments, you may also select the treatment dose, treatment duration, temperature at which the experiment is performed, and the collection time points. Each row in the experiment setup table represents all of the treatments and conditions that are performed to generate one sample. Within the experiment setup table, you can duplicate a particular sample and also delete a sample. When you are ready to run your experiment and collect your samples, click Run Experiment. You will be asked to confirm your experimental setup. After this point, you will not be able to modify the experiment setup for this experiment. Just like in a real laboratory, if you would like to modify your samples, you will need to set up a new experiment with your desired samples. Now that you have generated your samples, you are ready to select and perform your desired experimental technique. On the Select Technique page, you will see the 3 experimental techniques, Western blotting, flow cytometry, and microscopy, which are available within StarCellBio. Not all experimental techniques may be available to you to complete your particular assignment. In this assignment, microscopy is not available. For the rest of this video tutorial, we will focus on the Western blotting experimental technique. Western blotting is an experimental technique that is used to detect the overall expression or modification of a protein or proteins in a sample. The default name for this Western blot analysis is WB1, but I will rename it Mutant 1. Each experimental technique in StarCellBio has its own progress bar within each experimental technique tab. The progress bar will show your progress through the 7 steps of performing a Western blotting experimental technique. This first page of the Western blotting experimental technique contains an In the Lab feature, that shows an image of what a gel looks like and a video that highlights how a Western blot is performed in a real laboratory. To perform a Western blot, select the samples for which you would like to prepare lysates, select the gel type or the percentage of acrylamide in your gel, and load your protein samples into individual wells of the gel. Don't forget to add a protein marker against which you can measure the size of your protein of interest and move the samples into the desired order. Now you are ready to load, run, and transfer your gel. To analyze the amount and potential modifications of a protein of interest, in this case, cyclin E, select the appropriate primary and secondary antibodies. To adjust the exposure time, or the length of time that the blot is exposed to the film, move the exposure slider until the bands reach the desired intensity. To analyze a second protein on the blot, reprobe the membrane with a loading control, which in this case is PGK1. If you remembered to load a protein marker on your gel, then dashes representing the relative sizes in kilodaltons of the proteins within the marker will appear on the right side of your blot. To measure the size of the proteins represented in the bands on your Western blot, hover your cursor over the band that you would like to measure. Using the sizes of the proteins in the marker as a reference, the protein size represented by the band will be displayed in the red box on the right. To run a second Western blot using the same samples generated on the experiment setup page, click Add. A second Western blotting experimental technique will be added. There are two ways to navigate between Western blotting analyses. To navigate to another Western blotting analysis, simply click on the appropriate Western blotting analysis tab within Western blotting. Alternatively, you can navigate to the Select Technique page and select the appropriate Western blotting analysis there. To select a new experimental technique, navigate back to Select Technique in the navigation toolbar, then select New Flow Cytometry. Now you can easily use the navigation toolbar to navigate back and forth between different experimental techniques. As you can see, you will be automatically taken to the last viewed page within that experimental technique. To set up another experiment, click the New Experiment button at the top of any experiments page. Now you can perform another experiment within StarCellBio.